Okay, are we all set to start? Perhaps I can introduce myself. I'm Adam Sharples. I'm the Director General for Employment in the Department for Work and Pensions. And this breakout session gives us 45 minutes to look at the labour market context, basically the labour market, how it's changing. And the plan is, for those who haven't yet had their fix of PowerPoint slides for the day, I'm just going to give you a few of those to get us started. But the main point of this session is to give us a chance to range pretty widely across what's happening in the labour market, how might things develop over the next year or two. So I'm just going to talk for a bit, and then I hope we can open up discussion, comments, and questions. Okay, let's start with a few slides then. Some patterns here that will be fairly familiar. I'm going to look at what's happening to unemployment. So this is going back to the beginning of 2008, 2.5 years ago. And you can see first on the claimant count measure, the steep rise up to 1.5 million, just over 1.5 million. But interestingly, that decline from around October of last year, where claimant unemployment peaked, and we've since had a pretty steady decline. If you look at the ILO figures, the wider survey measure of unemployment, that also went up steeply, hit a plateau at about 2.5 million in the middle of last year, and since then has stayed pretty much constant. It's not quite the picture you get from the media when they report, because often they're reporting quarterly figures against previous quarterly figures, and they often seem to show an increase. So, ILO figures pretty much flat, claimant figures falling. In some ways, a really positive picture and very much better than had been expected this time last year. Other encouraging signs, redundancies shot up at the beginning of the recession to around about 300,000 every month. Since then, have declined quite steeply to a level still just above the pre-recession level, but very much better than the worst of the recession at the beginning of 2009. Another positive sign, if you look at the flow of people coming onto the claimant count, the number of people unemployed claiming benefit, the inflows at the beginning of the recession, through 2008, early part of 2009, the numbers went up quite dramatically, from about 200,000 a month, which it had been pretty steady at for a few years, up to over 350,000 people signing on as unemployed every month. But since the early part of 2009, that inflow has been steadily declining. Still some high numbers on the right-hand side at the end there. You can see still around about 300,000 people every month coming on to unemployment benefit. So multiply that by 12, we've got 3.5 million or so signings on every year. So a huge volume of people coming through the system, experiencing some unemployment. So it's always worth remembering that when we count up the total at any one time, the 1.5 million who are unemployed on the register, that disguises the impact of unemployment on people's lives, the 3.5 million who come through the system, and the ripple effects of that on their families and the insecurity that causes. So some good news there, the steady decline, and even better news on the outflows from unemployment. Those have continued to go up. You may think that in the midst of a recession, no jobs available, people would be stuck on unemployment, but all the signs are that people are still able to move through the system. And I do think that is a really effective challenge to those who say, what's the point of trying to encourage somebody to look for work when we all know there are no vacancies in the midst of a recession? you can see from that that there is a constant, steady flow of people moving into work. And our job broadly, whatever part of the welfare to work partnership we work in, our job broadly is to try and make sure everybody gets a chance to get into that flow of people moving into those vacancies. What's the outlook for unemployment? Well, the new Office for Budget Responsibility that was set up by the new coalition government now publishes unemployment forecasts, and this is their forecast for the pattern of unemployment in the light of the budget. And you can see, again, the two lines. The lower one is the claimant count, the higher one the ILO figure. And you can see how on the grey shaded area to the right of that chart, they are forecasting a steady decline in unemployment as the economy recovers and as growth returns. And that is, I should stress, having taken account of the government's plans to rebalance the fiscal position and so the squeeze on public spending. That forecast takes account of that, and it's a genuinely independent view. It's the great advantage of the Office for Budget Responsibility. It's not part of government, accountable to ministers. It's independent. They can give a completely balanced view, and people will judge their credibility based on their forecasting performance. So they have every incentive to come up with a genuine central view. So that's the overall picture. Some really encouraging news since last year. The labour market strengthening and the pattern of unemployment very, very much better than was feared by many commentators in the early part of last year. As you know, there were many forecasters who were saying unemployment was likely to go above 3 million on the wider measure, possibly even up to 4 million. That simply hasn't happened. And so it's quite interesting to ask why we think that's the case. What's been happening in the labour market to explain why things have gone well? The first thing to notice is that the recession this time is actually deeper than the last two big recessions. If we look at the pattern in the 1980s, it looks like that. What this is showing is for each successive quarter after the start of the recession, what is the percentage decline in output, the cumulative decline. So 5 quarters into the recession in the 1980s, output had declined by nearly 5%. What happened in the 1990s, the early 1990s recession? Well, actually, it was shallower than that. And what's happened this time? Actually, a much steeper decline in output. So you might have expected that the fall in employment would be worse than the last two recessions and that unemployment would be rising even faster.